They underestimated me the moment I walked into the room. Not because I said something wrong. Not because I failed. Because I didn't say anything at all. I was the quiet one in meetings. The man at the far end of the table with the older suit and the cheap notebook. The one people talked around, not to. They assumed silence meant fear. They assumed it meant weakness. They were wrong. My name is Daniel Harper, and for 12 years, I worked at Northline Logistics. I wasn't a manager. Wasn't an executive. Wasn't even salaried. I processed compliance reports. The paperwork no one wanted. The rules everyone ignored. The numbers that only mattered when something went wrong. That's why they gave the job to me. Because no one thought it mattered. And that's where they made their first mistake. Northline was run by a man named Victor Klein. Charismatic. Confident. The kind of man who smiled while checking his reflection in the glass behind you. Victor liked to say the company was a family. Families, apparently, worked weekends without pay. Families didn't ask about missing bonuses. Families stayed quiet. Victor noticed me once. Just once. He walked past my desk, glanced at my screen, and said, "Still crunching numbers, Daniel? You're reliable." I like that. Reliable. In Victor's world, that meant useful but invisible. After that, he never spoke to me again. Which gave me time. A lot of time. Compliance is boring. Until you realize it tells the truth. Every delayed shipment. Every rerouted container. Every signature that didn't quite match. Patterns don't shout. They whisper. And I listened. I noticed certain vendors always bypassed audits. Certain safety checks were marked complete before inspections happened. Certain losses were quietly written off as operational variance. Small enough not to alarm anyone. Big enough to matter. I flagged them quietly. They were ignored loudly. So I stopped flagging. Instead, I started saving. 3 years before everything collapsed, a junior analyst named Maya came to me. She was new. Still believed policies meant protection. She leaned over my desk and whispered, "Daniel, is it normal for invoices to be approved before delivery?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. And said, "Keep copies of everything." She frowned. Should I report it? I thought of Victor's smile. Not yet, I said. Just keep copies. Maya was fired 6 months later. Performance issues, they said. Victor never even learned her name. I learned something else instead. This company didn't punish mistakes. It punished attention. The day they decided I was disposable happened on a Tuesday. It always does. Victor stood at the front of the conference room talking about restructuring. That word only ever means one thing. Someone is about to lose something. When he said my name, he didn't even look at me. Daniel Harper. Your role is being eliminated. Just like that. 12 years reduced to a sentence. I nodded. Stood up. Smiled politely. Thank you for the opportunity, I said. Victor blinked. He wasn't used to gratitude from people he erased. HR will walk you out, he added. I packed my desk quietly. No speeches. No scenes. As I passed Victor, he leaned in and said, "No hard feelings. This is just business." I met his eyes. Of course, I said. And meant something very different. They thought I was leaving with a cardboard box. What they didn't know was that I was leaving with 12 years of memory. Because everything I had ever saved. Every discrepancy. Every overlooked signature. Every ignored report. Wasn't company property anymore. It was truth. And truth doesn't disappear just because you fire the person holding it. Revenge doesn't begin with action. It begins with patience. I took a smaller job across town. Lower pay. Less stress. More time. I watched Northline from a distance. Quarterly reports. Press releases. Victor's interviews about integrity and growth. I waited. Because companies like that don't collapse on their own. They collapse when someone opens the right door. The crack came from shipping lane 7C. An overseas accident. Injured workers. A journalist asking the wrong question. Northline denied responsibility. Of course they did. That's when I sent the first email. Anonymous. Precise. With attachments. I didn't accuse. I documented. The second email went to regulators. The third went to insurers. The fourth went to a board member Victor had quietly pushed aside years earlier. Every message ended the same way. These records speak for themselves. And they did. Victor called me a week later. Left a voicemail. Daniel, if you're hearing things, let's talk. Man to man. I deleted it. Not because I was angry. Because I was finished talking. Audits turned into investigations. Investigations turned into resignations. Victor stepped down temporarily. Then permanently. Stock fell. The board issued statements. None mentioned my name. That was fine. Revenge isn't about being seen. It's about balance. 3 months later, a legal firm contacted me. They wanted testimony. I agreed. Not to punish. To complete the record. Because being underestimated teaches you something powerful. If people don't think you matter, they'll show you everything. And eventually, they'll forget to stop you. They thought the worst part was over. That once Victor stepped down, the damage would stop spreading. That's what people always believe when the face of the problem disappears. They forget about the structure underneath. The habits. The shortcuts. The silence that allowed everything to happen. I agreed to testify, but not immediately. I asked for time. Not because I was afraid. Because timing matters. In the weeks after Victor's exit, Northline tried to stabilize. New interim leadership? Carefully worded emails about transparency. Promises that this was a new chapter. I read every word. And noticed what wasn't there. No mention of the compliance department. No mention of the reports I'd written. No mention of the system that had allowed Victor to operate unchecked for years. They were fixing the image. Not the cause. That's when I realized something important. Victor wasn't the only one who underestimated me. The company did too. The first interview with investigators happened in a small room that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. 2 men. 1 woman. Folders stacked neatly in front of them. They expected nerves. They expected emotion. They expected me to talk too much. Instead, I answered only what was asked. Dates. Processes. Where files were stored. Who signed off on what. No opinions. No accusations. Just facts. The woman finally leaned back and said, "You've been very thorough." I nodded. That was my job. When I left that room, I knew something had shifted. Because systems like Northline's don't fall apart when someone gets angry. They fall apart when someone refuses to be emotional. Victor reached out again. This time through a lawyer. A carefully worded message about cooperation and closure. I didn't respond. Then came the third attempt. An unlisted number. I answered by mistake. Daniel, Victor said, his voice lower than I remembered. You don't owe these people anything. I almost laughed. You owe me, he continued. 12 years. Loyalty. I made sure you had work. I waited. Silence makes people uncomfortable. You think this ends well for you, he said finally. Companies don't protect people like you. People like me. There it was. I'm not asking for protection, I said calmly. I'm finished. And I hung up. That was the last time I spoke to Victor Klein. Northline's internal audit uncovered more than anyone expected. Not just safety violations. Not just falsified reports. But a culture designed to bury responsibility. Emails instructing staff to reclassify losses. Meetings where concerns were labeled not strategic. Bonuses tied directly to ignoring red flags. Executives resigned quietly. Others fought. Some blamed Victor. Victor blamed everyone else. Then came the lawsuits. Workers. Contractors. Families affected by overseas accidents. Northline's legal team scrambled. And then they found my name. Buried in documents. Referenced in internal threads. The quiet compliance analyst who kept warning people. Suddenly, I mattered. Too late. They offered a settlement. Not money. Silence. A consulting contract. A non-disclosure agreement. A chance to move on peacefully. I declined. Not out of pride. Out of principle. Because silence is what built that company. I wasn't going to reinforce it. The trial didn't make headlines. That surprised people. But real accountability rarely does. It happens in conference rooms. In depositions. In decisions made when no one is watching. Victor never went to prison. People always expect that part. Instead, he lost everything else. His board seats. His reputation. His ability to pretend he was admired instead of feared. He faded. Which was fitting. Northline survived. Smaller. Watched. Different. They rewrote policies I'd suggested a decade earlier. They rebuilt compliance departments they used to mock. They invited me once to speak internally. I declined. I didn't need to explain myself. I had already been heard. Years later, someone asked me if it felt like revenge. I thought about that. Revenge suggests anger. This wasn't anger. It was correction. They underestimated me because I was quiet. Because I didn't demand attention. Because I didn't perform confidence. What they never understood was this. Silence isn't absence. It's observation. And observation, over time, becomes power. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by destroying. I won by remembering. By documenting. By waiting. Because when people think you don't matter, they stop hiding things from you. And that's when the truth finally gets room to breathe. Time passed in a way I didn't expect. Not with relief. Not with celebration. With quiet. When something you carry for years finally loosens its grip, the absence feels strange. Almost hollow. I kept working. Different companies. Short contracts. Always compliance. Always the work no one wanted. And every place felt familiar. Different names. Same shortcuts. People would ask why I never tried to move up. Why I didn't push for titles or visibility. I learned a long time ago that power doesn't always sit at the top. Sometimes it sits in the overlooked corners, watching. One afternoon, years later, I received an email from someone named Aaron. He said he'd found my name in old Northline records. Said he was starting a logistics company and wanted advice. Not about growth. About structure. What do I build so this never becomes what they were, he asked. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Then I agreed to meet him. We sat in a small office with mismatched chairs and no receptionist. He listened. Really listened. Not to stories. To process. To how things fail quietly before they fail loudly. At the end, he said something I hadn't heard in a long time. I want this company to work even if I'm wrong. That's when I realized something else. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about preventing the next one. Word spread. Slowly. Not about me. About results. Companies that asked for help before problems became scandals. Boards that wanted systems instead of speeches. People who didn't want a hero. They wanted stability. I stayed invisible. On purpose. Because visibility changes behavior. People perform when they're being watched. They reveal truth when they think they're not. One evening, after a long day reviewing audits, I stopped at a cafe near the train station. A man 2 tables over kept glancing at me. Older. Thinner. I recognized him before he spoke. Daniel, Victor said. He stood slowly, like the ground wasn't steady. I wasn't sure it was you. I nodded. He hesitated. Then Saturday. I lost everything, he said, as if I'd missed the news. I know. I didn't think it would end like that, he said. I waited. I thought, you were harmless, he added quietly. There it was. Not an apology. An admission. I said. To myself. He looked confused. I stayed because I thought being useful was enough, I continued. I left when I realized being silent didn't mean being powerless. Victor swallowed. I would have done things differently, he said. I believed him. People always do. After. We sat in silence. Then he stood. I hope it was worth it, he said. I watched him walk away. And felt nothing. Because revenge isn't satisfying when the other person finally understands. It's satisfying when you no longer need them to. Years later, someone asked me what the lesson was. What people should take away from all of it. I thought for a moment. Then said this. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one everyone forgets is listening. Because when you underestimate someone long enough, they learn everything you don't want them to know. And when the moment comes, they won't need permission. They'll already be finished.